Well, I can't believe I'm doing this video, but here we are. I don't normally show my face on camera, but I figure it's time to do so. It's about CrowdStrike. It's currently 10 a.m. on the 23rd of July 2024, and as many of you would know, on 19th of July, CrowdStrike managed to bring down a good chunk of the internet. And I've seen lots of videos about it, but I want to give you my perspective. And why is that? The answer is because the rhetoric is just bad and could lead to major implications for the cybersecurity industry, which we just can't have. This is not about CrowdStrike. It's somewhat about CrowdStrike, but the issue is cybersecurity. So, who am I? Well, I'm a 25-year cybersecurity industry veteran. I am a principal security architect for internal security at a Fortune 500. I'm not going to say who, but it's not going to be hard for you guys to work it out. I prefer that you do that rather than me try and announce it, because this is my opinion. It's not the opinion of my employer. It's not the opinion of past employers. And it's not the opinion of people who I've assisted outside of my employer either. So in 2017, in response to a desire and a need to do so, my employer chose to centralize its IT security functions globally, whereas they had previously been distributed into the regions. As part of that, I was responsible for selecting CrowdStrike Falcon and deploying it in my employer's business. At the time, it was 50,000 endpoints. It has now grown to almost 200,000, probably more. I don't currently anymore have access to all of our CrowdStrike consoles. Other people do. I'm more of an architect now rather than a typing away at the CrowdStrike portal guy, although I was for many years between 2017 to 2022. Now, this assessment and deployment of CrowdStrike was very difficult. We had partnerships with other security vendors, and I had to run complete end-to-end testing of the capabilities of each of these vendors. Now, I used tools which many cybersecurity personnel will be familiar with, such as Metasploit and others, to perform what you would consider to be advanced attacks against these endpoints, running all of these endpoint security tools. To be very blunt, only CrowdStrike detected them all. Now, I'm aware there are other channels out there on YouTube talking about CrowdStrike and saying things like, oh, well, it doesn't detect all the malware I threw at it. That's true. But that's not where the value of these tools lie. And that's why these tools exist, because they need to do better than just detect known malware. They need to detect nation-state threat actors. They need to detect e-crime threat actors when they try to break in and when they try to exfiltrate or corrupt and encrypt all of your data. That's what CrowdStrike is very, very good at. They are arguably the market leader. Now, there are people on Reddit who are currently saying that CrowdStrike is overvalued. I don't know about overvalued in the marketplace. Obviously, CrowdStrike as a business wants to maintain a very high value because they're a business. Duh, they're trying to make money. And these people have debated with me and others about how CrowdStrike does nothing and has no value. Look, folks, there's a reason 10 million devices running Windows were affected. It's because all those businesses chose CrowdStrike. Now, CrowdStrike's marketing, I believe, is a little over the top now, because that marketing is so effervescent. I'm not even sure if that's the right word, but because their marketing is so hypey, it's very easy to discount them and say, oh, well, all these customers are just falling for the hype. I don't agree with their current marketing strategy, and it makes it easier to attack them. But that's not why these companies chose CrowdStrike. It's not why we chose CrowdStrike. As I said, when I ran all these tests against CrowdStrike, all of these things were detected. Reverse shells, process injection. I could go on. It detected them and it immediately blocked them. And if it didn't immediately block them, the event was bubbled up to a team at CrowdStrike called OverWatch, and they investigated and they notified me to say someone is typing something on one of your servers, the server is about to be compromised or has just been compromised, and we recommend you immediately contain this host. So this is why CrowdStrike is so powerful. It's not just the agent, although the agent is the way that CrowdStrike is able to provide the service which, in my opinion, is of extremely high value. That service, as I just mentioned, is called OverWatch. So let's go back to businesses and why they've chosen CrowdStrike. They're not doing it because it's cheap, because it's not cheap. It is, again, arguably the best. So the OverWatch service provided by CrowdStrike has the ability to detect complex threats by nation-state actors as they do what they can to stay under the radar. They will probe your network. They might spend 6 months finding out who you are if it's a targeted attack. They will look for weak points of entry, whether those are computers exposed to the internet, like servers, or whether those are technical personnel who are a little too open on the internet and easily attacked. I am aware that by making this video, I am potentially creating or making myself a target, because people will identify me. They will think that I have high levels of access into technical systems, and they might try to phish me, right? So this is what we call spear phishing. It's attacking a high value target like a technical administrator. So when that happens, when that system is breached, or when that person is attacked and malware is injected onto their computer and maybe the threat actor is monitoring what they type, CrowdStrike OverWatch can detect that. The way they do it is their secret source. You will never get the source code. You will never know exactly what tools they use to do this unless an employee chooses to leave and divulge that information. But all OverWatch employees at CrowdStrike know exactly how their systems work. So what they do is they provide a service which can collect and collate every single kernel event from every single one of your endpoints, and in real time analyze all of those events for potential indicators of compromise. And then they will bubble those leads, right, up to an analyst, and an analyst will investigate that lead. Now, 99.999% of all of these leads are false positives, and an analyst has to determine that. But when it's actually a true positive, the analyst will use their expertise, their years of forensics and incident response expertise, to look at all other activities in a time range around this bad malicious event, and they will find how far or when it started or what they're doing right now across the target system and other systems if the threat actor has moved laterally. And they'll tell you this. You will receive an email, a phone call, an alert that says this machine is actively under attack right now. And by the virtue of having the Falcon agent, which of course sent that data to CrowdStrike, you also have the ability, and you can pay them to do this as well, to immediately contain that host. So with one click and about 5 seconds later, the affected host or hosts, whether that's a Windows server or a Linux server or a laptop or a Mac OS device, are cut off from the network. And then you have essentially, at that point, and not in every case, but in most situations, you have immediately contained that threat. Without this capability, that threat actor could have broken into one PC, taken control of it, sat in your network for days, months, or weeks, months, years even, waiting for the time to strike. And then when they chose to do so, they exfiltrate the data. Or, if they're an e-crime actor, they encrypt and ransomware the data, or they exfiltrate the data and then ransom you and say, if you don't pay us, we'll expose that data to the internet. There's many ways to actually run these types of attacks. So this is a long way to describe the value of OverWatch. What if you wanted to do this yourself? Well, To do what Overwatch does, and again, this is pennies on the dollar compared to what it would cost you to do this. Now, many businesses have Overwatch and also do this, but the cost and the size of the team to do it themselves is greatly reduced by the virtue of having a tool like Overwatch. So, to do this yourself, you would need to have the ability to capture all raw system events on every single device, which means you need to deploy some software just to do that. You need to maintain that software and make sure it's always up to date and always capturing the right information. You have to do that. Your team has to do that. You have to know how to parse or process all of those events and categorize them. And when new event types come along or new systems come along, you have to do that all over again. You have to write your own tools or buy other tools that try to do this, right? To scrape through billions of events and find needles in a haystack. Maybe trillions of events. You may find a vendor like Splunk or Exabeam or others who say they do this very well and just try and lean on their own detection capabilities. But they're not necessarily as good at it as we might think. So SIEM, or SIEM, Security Incident and Event Monitoring, or maybe SEIM if you want to do it that way around, Security Event and Incident Monitoring, was the big promise of the early to mid 2000s of security monitoring and detection. It didn't deliver. And that's why vendors like CrowdStrike have succeeded, because they are delivering on that promise. Okay, so we also said just then, you have to scrape through those billions of events and find those needles in the haystack. You also need to know how to investigate those events. And this is the analogy of the leads that CrowdStrike generates. You need to look at the leads, and you need to have the strong expertise to determine if that's an indicator of maliciousness or not. And that is really, really hard. And it requires that you understand the operating system of the target device in extreme detail. Is it normal that this file got changed at this date? Is it normal that this file's content was changed to this value? Only a forensic investigator knows that. An incident responder knows that. It is very, very, very hard. It is a full-time career, and people burn out of this career regularly. It is that hard. So you need to have a team. To do this at the same scale and speed that Overwatch can do it, you would need to do it 24/7, which means you require a team of at least 12 people to cover 3 shifts a day, 3 8-hour shifts for 24/7, right? Coverage for when some personnel are on leave for personal, paid time off, or for sickness. You need to have level 1, 2, and 3 personnel. So people who receive initial events, discount all the obvious noise and just get rid of it. Then the level 2 people who investigate the things that go past level 1. And then the level 3 people who investigate what gets past level 2. And the level 3 people are where the money is. This is an extremely niche career. These people can or should be earning, let's say in the US, in a West Coast high density population center like California, for example, should be earning well north of 200,000 USD a year. Well north. That's how hard this is. And there's not very many of them. So if another business wants to spin up a CrowdStrike-like business, then they're going to poach those people and pay them even more. So the cost of doing this is extremely high. So we had level 1, 2, and 3. You also need multiple people of each skill level, right? You can't just have one level 1 guy, one level 2, and one level 3. At some point, they'll be overloaded or they'll be on leave. It is not cheap to do this. And let's be very clear, CrowdStrike have managed, however they've done it, to reliably take trillions of events, generate leads, investigate those leads, and notify their customers of signs of compromise with a very high level of assurance. Nothing's 100%. No one's going to catch everything. But with a very high level of assurance, at pennies on the dollar compared to what you can do. So unless you're going to build something which scales like CrowdStrike does, which is probably not core business for your business, you can't afford to do it. That's why these tools are so powerful. It is why customers buy CrowdStrike. It is why the blast radius of the CrowdStrike incident was so wide. Okay. Let's talk about why so many businesses were affected. Actually, no, let me jump back a little bit and say, why were home users not affected? CrowdStrike Falcon is not a suitable antivirus tool for home users. Let me give you a great example why. You have a car. You're driving your car and the car breaks down. If the car's computer tells you that your camshafts are 15 degrees out of alignment, how is that helpful to you? You're not a mechanic. It is useless information because it's not what you do. The home user needs a silent tool which just says, hey, you've got a virus, I've tried to clean it up. Or, hey, you've got a virus, it's really bad, and you should just rebuild your computer. And in fact, very few of them do that because nobody wants to be told that. But that's the reality of home user antivirus, anti-malware software. It can't detect everything. What it detects is limited. It's trying to do anti-ransomware capabilities today, but without getting in your face and without needing you to be a cybersecurity expert to deal with the notifications. So, CrowdStrike don't sell to those people because CrowdStrike is the tool for the mechanic. It tells the mechanic in great detail what's going on, and a mechanic who has mechanical expertise knows how to respond to that, or at least they should. Now, CrowdStrike now sells a service called CrowdStrike Falcon Complete, and that service provides all the capabilities from detection through to remediation. They have the ability, you grant them the permission to contain your hosts, you grant them the permission to remove malware, you grant them the permission to perform investigations across all of your systems to find where else the threat actor has gone. And for any business who is quite small and has no dedicated cybersecurity team, I would recommend they buy services like that. They will find themselves in a much better position than 99.9% of any other business out there in regards to their ability to not have their data destroyed or exfiltrated. So let's go back to the terminology I used earlier, which is blast radius. Why is the blast radius of the CrowdStrike issue so big? Well, number one, because everybody's using it, and they're using it because it's good, not because it's cheap. Number two, the blast radius was so high because CrowdStrike, and we'll get to the fact that they completely fucked up here. This is not up for debate. But the issue is that CrowdStrike is trying to provide protection for an operating system that could be running absolutely anything written by anyone. So, in order for you to do that, you need to have very, very, very low level visibility and control over the operating system. In doing so, we assign trust to players like CrowdStrike that they won't fuck up. Because if you fuck up, the operating system crashes. And this was an absolute worst case scenario crash. These things have happened before, but the recoverability of them I'm not talking about CrowdStrike, I'm talking about other issues in the industry where there's been crashes caused by bugs. Microsoft have had them. They've been a lot easier to recover. But for CrowdStrike to have the control and visibility they need, their level of access to the operating system is very low level, and it has to be. Let me give you an example. If my antivirus software doesn't run as a kernel driver that could crash the system. So let's say you're worried about your antivirus crashing the system, so you choose an antivirus vendor who does not have kernel level access. Therefore, they can't crash the system because they don't have the ability to crash the operating system, which is the kernel, right? Kernel. They can't do that. However, if a threat actor then compromises one application on that system, and that application is running as a privileged user, that threat actor now has the ability to kill your antivirus software. Just terminate it, because the antivirus software is running at the same privilege level as the application that's been compromised, right? As the software that the threat actor is running. So how do you avoid that? Well, you install your antivirus, anti-malware software so low down in the system that the only way for a threat actor to defeat it would be to have physical access to the host. Now, that is a throwaway term, and many cybersecurity folks will tell me, Ed, there are many ways around that. Of course there are. Nothing is 100%. You cannot reduce risk to zero, but you can reduce risk to an acceptable level, and that's why these tools, such as CrowdStrike, such as Trend Micro, Microsoft Windows Defender, all run at kernel level. Now, what does CrowdStrike do differently to other vendors that made this so bad? And the answer is CrowdStrike does a good thing, which is every day, potentially multiple times a day, they provide updates and instructions to the CrowdStrike agent to defend against the latest attacks. This is another reason why CrowdStrike is so good, because if there is a new attack, and often we call these 0 days in the industry, CrowdStrike can rapidly, without having to push a new software agent version, they can send commands down to the agent which says, block this thing, right? Within hours. And that's what they did on Friday. They provided an update. Now, for some reason, and this is where they fucked up, and I'm going to keep using that term, that update was corrupted. And the problem is the CrowdStrike agent driver loads so early in the operating system boot process that your system crashes and then reboots, and it loads and gets you to the login prompt, and then that CrowdStrike command runs and it crashes again. And the only way to defeat that, to actually get the system updated, was A, hope that the network stack of your Windows operating system came up, made a DNS request, connected to the CrowdStrike servers, negotiated a crypto handshake, TLS it's called, downloaded the update, and loaded the update before the crash occurred. It's what we call a race condition. Likelihood of that occurring? Supposedly 1 in 15 if you look at the guidance from CrowdStrike. But for many people, that didn't happen. For end users, if they had a BitLocker recovery key with an encrypted hard disk, they had the ability to get in and delete the file. For cloud platforms, a lot harder. The whole boot to safe mode option is very hard to get to in the cloud. So the blast radius was huge because everybody runs CrowdStrike, and nearly every machine running CrowdStrike was affected, and nearly every machine running CrowdStrike got stuck in a boot loop. It's, I don't want to use the term unforgivable. And the reason I don't want to use the term unforgivable is the next obvious question is, why should businesses not just dump CrowdStrike and move on? Why should a new player in the industry or a new business even consider CrowdStrike? Why would you trust them after this? So in my personal opinion, and I don't speak for my employer, I don't want to leave. I don't want to go to another vendor. I know how good CrowdStrike is. In terms of the job we pay them to do, they are very good at it. So let's say we wanted to leave. And go where? There are so many players in the industry, very few of whom I trust, most of which I have experience with. And these are the players who I assessed in 2017, who have probably improved now because they have to, because CrowdStrike stole their lunch. These players failed. They didn't detect any of the modern attacks. The attacks just sailed right through. Sure, they detected some viruses, but from the perspective of me, being responsible for the security design of 200,000 workstations and servers, that's low-hanging fruit, right? Sometimes you'll catch malware, sometimes you won't. But the idea is you don't want malware to easily get to systems. You design your environment as a business so that malware is harder to get in. But the threat actors that are actually poking away at you, they're the harder ones to get. That's why I don't focus primarily on just how many viruses, if I throw 10,000 viruses at it, that it can detect. It's just not where I'm concerned. It's not where you should be concerned if you run a business. So the industry, it's full of promises that overpromise and underdeliver. And CrowdStrike are imperfect. CrowdStrike is moving now and branching out into areas like cloud security and identity security. And my view is they're not the market leader. They are having to acquire this capability. What CrowdStrike is very, very good at, and the market leader, is where they started. To be just as good in other areas is harder. They have to acquire that capability or create it from scratch using their own internal R&D. And it's difficult to do that when you have young, hungry players in the industry who are just solely focused on these new problems. And this is where CrowdStrike is having to fight harder. So with players like CrowdStrike, now that the endpoint is a lot harder to attack and defeat, what are they doing? Well, they're already doing what they're doing, and that's they're pivoting to identity attacks and they're pivoting to cloud attacks. They know that when you run cloud services, there isn't necessarily a CrowdStrike Falcon running there. This is true for AWS. This is true for Azure. This is true for Google. Oh my God. This is true for Google Cloud Platform. If you pivot your attack to where the defenders are not, you have a much higher chance of succeeding. And let's be clear, identity security and cloud security as a whole across the industry isn't where it needs to be. CrowdStrike is very, very good at the endpoint. I continue to support CrowdStrike as the tier 1 endpoint security player. But for cloud security and identity, the market is open. And CrowdStrike are competing with everyone there. And someone is likely to come out on top and become the CrowdStrike of identity, whoever that may be. So if you're a business currently running CrowdStrike and you're thinking, screw these guys, I would only ask that you consider the following. Number one, it is unlikely this is going to happen again. They should have seen it coming. I mean, the fact that they have an agent which can easily get an operating system into a catch-22 race condition and didn't see that as a problem that had to have a self-healing recovery method, that's a critical failure right there. And they know it. They know it. I know the CTO of CrowdStrike. I've met the guy. I've had dinner with him. My direct leadership has had a long history of working with George Kurtz at CrowdStrike. You know, we know these people. Obviously, we are just a customer of theirs, and there's lots of things that we don't know, but I've met them, and they're talented people, and they are probably kicking themselves for allowing this scenario to happen. Therefore, is it likely to happen again in this manner? No. Let's say you move to a new vendor. That new vendor has its own problems. You don't know the vendor. They don't know you. You don't have the relationship with them. And you don't know how good their own development and QA is. Now, for sure, any cybersecurity player worth their salt right now is absolutely scrambling and asking their internal engineering teams, have we done something as fucking stupid as this? And you would hope that if they have, they're going to fix it. But there are other problems. You know that unknown statement from back in the weapons of mass destruction stuff with Iraq back in the early 2000s. It's the unknown unknowns that catch you out, right? You just don't even visualize the potential for a problem. You don't fix it because you're not aware of it. And then one day it comes and it bites you in the ass. Any vendor can have that. CrowdStrike can still have that. They would be very, very reticent to let anything like this happen ever again. What I suspect CrowdStrike might do is they might grant you as the end user customer now, going forward, the ability to control and restrict when channel file updates arrive. There are many configurable items in CrowdStrike, but believe me, one of the benefits of CrowdStrike, it isn't 5,000 radio buttons you have to tick. It's just a handful of settings which work, including agent version control. So you can say, I don't want the latest agent version. I want N-1, which is the latest version -1 revision, or -2 or -3, and you can even manually control it. These particular files, though, that crashed Windows, You don't currently have control over those. These are the channel files. Customers are going to demand control of this. What is going to happen is customers are going to be very, very, very reticent to update versions for months, maybe a year or more. And the problem that that's going to create in the cybersecurity industry is threat actors are going to be able to leverage the fact that customers of CrowdStrike are not running the latest protections because they're afraid to, because if they do run the latest protection, then they're worried that their systems might crash. That is itself a massive problem. Fundamentally, what happened last week was a massive problem, and it should never have happened. And there's a lot of history to this. It is absolutely CrowdStrike's fault that they fucked up and did this. But the reason these tools exist in the manner that they do, with the level of access that they have, is because it's the only way to defend ourselves against attack. So let's now talk about CrowdStrike and auditing. I've seen people on Reddit saying, well, CrowdStrike should be audited by the public. Well, first of all, no commercial corporation's going to let the public see their source code. That's their intellectual property. It's how they make money. It's how they differentiate. And to hear this come from people who supposedly believe in capitalism, this is from the Wall Street Bets subreddit, by the way, is just hypocritical. And I don't even want to really entertain some of these notions. But regarding auditing, these vendors are audited. They are audited by industry and regulatory bodies. They're audited to ensure they're not breaching privacy. Privacy is a big concern when your laptop has a kernel driver on that system, which anyone in IT could look at. They have the power, they have the ability to do that. But you audit these tools to make sure that they can be proven to provide, say, an audit trail of anybody who tries to abuse the system. It's the only way these tools will ever get past any kind of EU regulation. Now, I know many of you might be in Australia or America watching this, and you just don't have any protections, particularly if you're in America. But in the EU, for my own employer to get these tools even deployed, we had to go through a German Works Council. And the council gets to say, well, what are you doing with it? What are the protections you have? And we have to prove it. Not just once off, but regularly prove that this system is not being abused. So there's just a certain amount of trust that you require. And, what do you mean? What do you mean trust? Classic example is democracy. You, as the populace of a country, vote for your peers, hopefully they're peers as opposed to just rich corporate fat cats, right? Hopefully they're your peers, and you vote them in, and you grant them permission for you to be governed by them. It is trust. And this is the same thing with these security tools. So let's take it down to the individual example. You might be a programmer, and what you're doing is you are selling your services to an employer with the return of being paid, the reward of being paid for that expertise, right? Now, for that company to pay you, they have to continue to exist. And to continue to exist, one of the things they have to do is have good cybersecurity. Because if they don't have good cybersecurity, then they won't exist and there's no one there to pay you. So you have to put a certain amount of trust in them when they say, here is your laptop that we're issuing you for this work. And by the way, that laptop has a bunch of security tools on it which have the technical capability of monitoring everything that occurs on that device. But we are telling you that we won't do that unless there is a security incident which we need to investigate. And that's the trust point. You could refuse that. You could say, no, I refuse. They're going to fire you. They're not going to let you work for them, right? So for them to exist, you have to give them the trust of running tools on your device which have high levels of access. It's just as simple as that. And this applies to every player. This applies to Windows Defender ATP, or whatever they're calling it today for their most advanced Defender solution. Very similar in capability to CrowdStrike. If anything, when we did the review recently, because we do regularly re-review our vendors. They were a close second at the time, particularly for Windows systems. Not enough to dump CrowdStrike, but we looked at them, and they also have that level of visibility. Now I want to address some other ridiculous comments. Certain person on the internet who's extremely famous suggested that this is a DEI issue. I don't really want to entertain stupid statements like this. Now, DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Suggesting that the reason CrowdStrike had this issue is they're now hiring women. Like it's as simply as you can interpret his statement. You know, this is reductive. Reductive arguments help no one. The world and society, and cybersecurity in particular, is insanely complex, with thousands and thousands of moving parts. To boil down an issue like this to, it must be because they hired more women, is extremely reductive, directly objectifies 50% of the entire population, and is just plain being a dick. So, how do I wrap this up? For existing CrowdStrike customers, before jumping ship, know the severity of the decision you're making. For new customers, I would say that you have the right to do what the hell you want. You don't owe CrowdStrike anything. They are very good at what they do, but I don't know how good other players such as SentinelOne, Trend Micro are today. They could be a lot better. I would ask that you consider vendors which provide an OverWatch style service with the same level of expertise that OverWatch can give you. If you don't do that, then you really are selling yourself short. I realize my headphones on are as well. I don't need my headphones on. What should CrowdStrike offer you? Woof, I don't even want to go there. It's not my decision to make. I am certain that my own leadership will have very specific demands from CrowdStrike. Let's talk, though, about the contractual stuff that has been raised in other videos, that the CrowdStrike contract restricts the remuneration or you can get from such incidents. Look, this is not unique to CrowdStrike. Every vendor does it. You don't get to just sue Microsoft into oblivion if there's issues with Azure or Amazon. So whilst, I don't think I can really comment on how acceptable these contracts are, but they're not uncommon. So, yeah, I don't really have huge guidance on, what you should do in relation to your relationship with CrowdStrike financially. And to finally wrap this up, what do I want CrowdStrike to do? Well, obviously, don't fucking do this again. They'll probably never tell me what happened, particularly now that I've released a video publicly talking about it. I'm a customer, but I probably could no longer be trusted, because what if he put it on his YouTube channel and broke the NDA? Right? So yeah, they're unlikely to ever tell me what the core issue is, and that's kind of okay. As much as I like to know things because I'm technical, they basically need to improve the QA. So I'm bitterly disappointed that CrowdStrike had this level of access in the kernel with dynamically updated files in a kernel driver, and not think, what happens if, what if we do this? These types of components need to be self-healing. That is, an example might be when a channel file comes down, the kernel driver looks at the content of that, assesses if it would obviously cause an issue, and immediately unloads it. But that's like that's the last resort, right? So that should be there, absolutely. Your first resort is, this kind of file should never, ever, ever leave the premises of the development team at CrowdStrike. It should have been caught. And I don't know why it wasn't caught. And I don't want to speculate because I'm not a programmer, right? I can script. I can write Arduino code to do electrical projects and stuff. But yeah, I'm not a programmer, so I can't comment. This kind of problem will happen again, not with CrowdStrike, but with somebody else. And this is fundamentally an issue with how interconnected things are. It's also an issue with when one player holds a large chunk of the market. You can blame CrowdStrike for that, but you have to be aware that Microsoft is in a very similar position. They own a big chunk of the cloud market, let alone Windows, the operating system. And the Linux kernel is also here in this position. Like the Linux kernel could potentially have this issue. You would expect it to be less likely because of the number of people assessing the kernel, and also the fact that kernels don't get updated hourly. It's unlikely to occur in that regard. But it can happen again. I would say it will happen again. And just make sure as an individual and as a business that you do what you can. You do what you can to try and cater for this. You can't cover every base. Anyway, good luck out there.